In the 1988 NBA playoffs, the Chicago Bulls were defeated by the Detroit Pistons in round 2. The Pistons' now famous Jordan rules held Jordan to just one 30-point game, and along with that was instrumental in the Pistons' 3 finals runs and 2 championships. The Bulls were struggling to find playoff success. Only now had they gone out of the first round with MJ, and a narrative in the organization was building as the days passed. Despite MJ winning the league MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, making All-NBA First Team and being an All-Star, leading the league in steals per game, the scoring champion, minutes per game leader, Jordan was racking up awards that many other superstars would dream of. But yet, his playstyle was not translating to team success. Despite averaging amazing stats and being the best player in the league, the Bulls could not win a championship. There had been multiple attempts to increase the depth of Jordan's supporting cast, but so far they had failed. The Bulls were thinking that this playstyle wouldn't contribute to a great legacy, and this is where I shift to the owner of the Bulls, Jerry Reinsdorf. Reinsdorf was actually the owner of the Chicago White Sox in the MLB too, so he was one of the select managers in sports history to have managed 2 teams simultaneously. Doug Collins, the coach of the Bulls, had informed Reinsdorf about how the team wouldn't win without Jordan. As the Bulls' round 2 defeat was coming to an end, something happened that might have been the biggest what-if in NBA history if it happened. Donald Sterling, the owner of the Clippers, made an offer to the Bulls, a combination of 5 players or draft picks. The Clippers were desperate. They had just finished one of their worst seasons in franchise history, going 17-65. No All-Stars were on their roster, and arguably their best player was Michael Cage, whose stats dipped in the following season. The Bulls were actually interested in this trade, so much so Reinsdorf and Collins loved the idea of building a team with loads of depth without Jordan. The Bulls wanted to have a clear path towards a championship, and it was uncertain how fast rookie Scottie Pippen would blossom to an All-Star, if he did so. Discussion happened between closed doors, with the general public completely unaware. Ultimately, the trade was declined, and this was one of the best decisions the Chicago Bulls have ever made. It led them to 2 three-peats, Jordan propelling himself into the GOAT conversation, an unmatched legacy and influence across not just the entire league, but sports in general, and many unforgettable shots and events. But what if the trade went through? What if instead the Bulls had more confidence to make the trade? Would the Bulls continue to find success? How would the Clippers do in this new era? Stick around to find out, because we're going to explore the time that Michael Jordan was almost traded to the Los Angeles Clippers. Okay, before we get to this, I just want to remind you that if you want to support my channel, consider subscribing, which helps push my channel and videos to more people. I would really appreciate it. As outstanding as his proposed Clippers trade was, it wasn't the first time Jordan could have ended up in a different franchise that wasn't the Wizards. On June 17, 1984, the Chicago Tribune reported that the Bulls were negotiating with the Seattle Supersonics about a trade which would land them big man Jack Sikma. Sikma would go on to make the Hall of Fame, as well as becoming a 7-time All-Star. The negotiation fell through, so the Bulls looked for another player similar to Sikma, Terry Cummings.
I'm coming!
Cummings would later become an MVP candidate the following season, and he won Rookie of the Year. The Bulls planned to trade their 3rd overall pick to the Clippers, and along with this, the Dallas Mavericks would have been involved, making this a 3-team trade, one of the first of its kind. But once again, the proposal was rejected, and with the 3rd pick in the 1984 draft, they couldn't draft Olajuwon. With Sam Bowie, the infamous draft bust, as the 2nd pick, the Bulls were able to draft Jordan. In the 4 years that Jordan was with the Bulls at this point, the team had 3 straight first-round exits, and 1 second-round exit to the Pistons, which I mentioned earlier. Since the Bulls' motivation for a championship was starting to wane, and coincidentally, Donald Sterling was there actively looking for a player who could compete with Magic Johnson, ultimately, trade talks began, and so we arrive at just before the 1988 NBA draft. One day, Reinsdorf received a call from Donald Sterling. Reinsdorf accepted that call, and discussion began. Sterling had a proposal that he could trade for Jordan by the Bulls getting a combination of the Clippers' 5 players or draft picks. One such combination the Bulls could do, 2 players and 3 draft picks, or no players and 5 draft picks. This proposal allowed for a lot of flexibility. but it also meant that the Bulls had lots of leeway to either make an ideal or suboptimal choice. It is unknown which players the Bulls were targeting, but theoretically, they would have looked at 3 players, so the Bulls would have gone 2 picks. Those 3 players were rebounding champion Michael Cage, Benoit Benjamin, and Mike Woodson. The 2 picks were the most important part of the trade. Since the Clippers had a bad record, they would most likely get the first pick, or at least a top 5 one. There were many great prospects to draft from: Danny Manning, Mitch Richmond, Charles Smith, Hersey Hawkins, and 7-footer Rick Smits. Smits and Richmond were actually favorites of the Bulls to draft. Since Charles Oakley was months away from leaving, the Bulls were now going to lack a good center. And they also needed a shooting guard, with similar scoring roles that reduced the impact of Jordan's departure. The Bulls would still have their own pick, which meant they could draft a good point guard, like Rod Strickland. Or they could use the assets that would have gone in this trade for a second trade that could get them Kevin Johnson, who is a certified all-star and yet another point guard. The Clippers later on went to get the 1st and 6th picks, so the Bulls could safely select Smits and Richmond. This trade would give the Bulls a very balanced roster, a jack of all trades you can say. While there was no longer a single superstar, many players would contribute in many different and important ways, and combine into a similar impact that Jordan could all do by himself. Their lineup would now consist of Pippen, Richmond, Smits, Cage, Horace Grant, etc. They were young and athletic, and their individual futures seemed bright. A jack-of-all-trades roster is both an advantage and disadvantage. While there aren't any weaknesses with a jack-of-all-trades roster, one player from the opposing team, who is a superstar, let's say Magic Johnson or Larry Bird, could make things fall apart, especially in the playoffs. One example is the 2014-15 Atlanta Hawks. With no superstar, they still won 60 games, while LeBron crushed them in the Eastern Conference Finals with a sweep. Discussion continued, and as time went on, Reinsdorf was realizing something. Jordan was literally the best player in the league. With all those accolades from his last season, him being in his prime with no signs of stopping, along with being too influential and too profitable for the Bulls, ultimately, Reinsdorf thought that the disadvantages of this trade was just a little too much, even though the advantages were convincing. Reinsdorf once again called Sterling, and he said that he couldn't trade Jordan. If Jordan were to be traded, the Bulls fans wouldn't have had a great time. Attendance and excitement would drop. The reputation of Jerry Reinsdorf would have been made way worse. When a once loyal superstar leaves a team, it can cause mayhem. Burned jerseys, lots of booing fans, those might be the end outcome. Once again, we'll use LeBron as an example for this. When he made his famous decision to go to the Miami Heat for the 2010-11 season, people were pissed. In his first game against the Cavaliers, the fans went as far as holding signs and encouraged LeBron to miss free throws. And so as time went on with both franchises, the Clippers continued suffering. Danny Manning, who would be the Clippers' first pick, wasn't quite good enough for the Clippers to win a championship either. Their best result in the early 1990s, 2 first-round exits, which culminated in decisive games against the Jazz and the Rockets in 1992 and 1993 respectively. By 1994, they couldn't make the playoffs anymore, and it was rebuilding time once again. The Bulls took some more time to step on top of the world. In 1989 and 1990, Detroit once again stopped the Bulls, this time in the Eastern Conference Finals. In the latter defeat, the series made it to Game 7, where the Bulls were blown out by 19 points. But finally, the following year, the Pistons weren't looking unstoppable anymore. Isaiah Thomas was struggling with injuries, and the Bulls defeated the Pistons in a 4-game sweep. The rest is history. The Bulls win their first, second, and third rings. Jordan retires, comes back, lose in the second round in 1995, win their 4th, 5th, and 6th, and Jordan retires again. Since then, the Bulls have failed to reclaim their top spot. In 2011 and 2012, they were championship contenders, but the Miami Heat squashed them in 5 games in the Eastern Conference Finals, and Derrick Rose tore his ACL in 2012, which was the beginning of the derailment of his career. Alright, one final thing to hypothesize. How would the Bulls and Clippers have done in the years following their trade? One stat that will greatly help us: win shares, an advanced measurement of how many wins a player contributes to their team. Let's take a look at the Clippers first. Jordan contributed 19 wins in the 1988-89 season, and the 3 players the Bulls were looking for from their roster contributed to 11 wins. 19 minus 11 is 8. 17, the amount of wins the Clippers had in the 1987-88 season, plus 8 is 25. So instead of going 21-61, they go 25-57. Yeah, this isn't much better. It's clear that this trade wouldn't have helped the Clippers that much immediately. Even if they would have won a championship, it would have taken a large effort to build the rest of the roster that would help Jordan, and that would have already affected his legacy greatly. He wouldn't have been in the GOAT conversation, or possibly the top 10 of all time conversation. On the Bulls' end, they would have continued to make the playoffs. Smits would have added 4 wins, Mitch would have added 5, the 3 of the proposed players would have added 11, and possibly if the Bulls selected Rod Strickland, that's another 3 wins. I'm going to say this right now. The Bulls would have done better without Jordan in terms of team record, at least for a few years. Sounds like I'm lying, doesn't it? But it's not. Combine all of those Bulls win totals up, and that's 23 wins, 4 more than Jordan's impact. So instead of going 47-35, they would have gone 51-31. I feel like the Bulls would have gone past the Cavaliers easy, but the Knicks? Patrick Ewing was still pretty young and not in his prime yet, and there was also Charles Oakley now. Even though this was a jack-of-all-trades roster, I'm not entirely sure if they would have gone past the Knicks, although I lean more to saying yes by a little bit. If they do, they would have faced the Pistons. Smits, Richmond, and most of the rest of the team, except maybe Pippen and Grant, would not have had enough experience to deal with the Pistons' tough defense. After all, said tough defense helped motivate Jordan to become better. But Jordan's mentality was, and still is, uncommon in the NBA, so it's unlikely the Bulls would have won against the Pistons in the 1989 playoffs. In 1991, Richmond improved his win shares to 7, but Smits went down to 2. Strickland also went up to 5, but Mike Woodson was in his last season, but he was contributing a negative impact on win shares, so it didn't really matter. KD's win shares went down to 4. Benoit would have gone down to 3. Along with other player improvements in real life, the Bulls would have once again increased to 62 wins. As for their playoff performances, I do believe they make it to the finals like they did in real life, and there's a legitimate chance they win the series against the Lakers for their first championship. There likely would have been many roster changes by now, so potentially one of their 1988 trade assets would have been removed from the team. But once again, assuming the roster remains the same, the last what-if season I hypothesized is 1992. Smits went back up to 3 win shares, Strickland remains at the same amount, Richmond goes down to 4, and Cage goes back up to 7. Benoit was down again to 2. The Bulls would have won an amazing 68 games, which sounds unprecedented considering that there's no Jordan. At this point, the trade would have demonstrated its potential. The Bulls having unstoppable depth in the 1990s will ultimately lead them to a new legacy entirely, similar to the 2000s Detroit Pistons. I could continue and hypothesize 1993, 1994, and beyond, but even with a small timeline, the effects really showed. There have been many what-ifs in NBA history, some bigger than others. This one is a great example of one of the bigger what-ifs. It completely changes many aspects of not just 2 franchise legacies, but the NBA as a whole. The GOAT debate would have been LeBron or Kobe instead, and many franchises get a second chance at winning a ring, and underrated players might not be underrated anymore. This also concerns the NBA draft orders over the rest of the 80s, the 90s, and possibly the early 2000s if Jordan decides to play until 2003. Those Jordan sneakers you see on television will have not been as popular. Instead, maybe we'd be wearing Karl Malone sneakers.
Oh my god, bro. Oh, hell no, man. What the fuck?
Anyways, I'm some random Xander, and this is it. Goodbye.